everybody. Welcome. Maybe I'll just start with like a quick round of introductions and then do a quick recap of week one, and then we can dive into questions. Any questions that you have, send it to us in Slido. We will prioritize validation related questions, but let me drop that in the chat there. Okay. All right, so welcome everybody to Validation Program Week 1 Office Hours. My name is Melissa. I am Program Lead at Iterative. You probably recognize my name from the emails I've been sending with information about the validation program. So this is the face to the name. Sukan is here with me. He is co-founder and managing partner at Iterative. His face needs no introduction. You hopefully have seen his face talking to you this week about validation in the videos that we sent over to you. Quick recap of week 1. So sometime this week, whether it was earlier or if you joined a little bit late, you may have just received it, but sometime this week, you received an email with links to the first 2 modules of our validation program. The focus of this week was really about kind of laying the groundwork for validation. So we covered things like how we define validation, why validation is so important, what successful validation looks like. We also covered the 5 essential questions you should ask yourself before validating. And then we introduced a couple of concepts that are probably new to you. The first one being the 3 components needed to run a validation experiment. These 3 components being 1, generating traffic, 2, communicating your idea, and 3, measuring interest. And then another concept that we call configuration. This is something I think, Sukan, you kind of just made up and we liked it and we kind of just ran with it. But configurations is kind of a choose your own adventure approach to deciding on options for these 3 components. So hopefully this all sounds familiar to you. If it doesn't, hopefully you're excited to kind of dig into this a little bit more after this session. But the next hour is really all about you all. We're here to help you deepen your understanding of validation. So ask questions in the Slido. We'll go through it together and we'll take it from there. Anything from you, Sukan, before we dive in?
No, I think, Melissa, they covered module. You and I have been working on a lot of modules. We covered 1 and 2 this week, right?
Yes.
So we sent that out. Okay, cool,
Yes.
great. I have that open, so I remember kind of like what those modules were about. Maybe the first thing I'll kind of say for everybody is I think these 2 modules are like super important to just get on the same page about what validation is and kind of like why it's important for what everybody is kind of like working on. I think there's been a lot of people talk about validation kind of like around, and there's no kind of clear definition. And so we wanted to kind of be opinionated about what our definition is and how that kind of like works. So if it doesn't make sense to you on kind of like how to use it, why it's important, that kind of stuff, we should definitely talk about it kind of these office hours. But yeah, open it up to kind of question.
All right, thanks, Sukan. Let me share the Slido so we can all see it. All right. Can you all see this? Pumpkin themed, Halloween themed Slido page?
Yep.
All right. So this first question, how much landing page website visits is enough in general to make a decision about the idea, whether the idea is validated or not?
So I think a good question. I covered this in kind of the first module. There is no rule and there's no test. There's no number of web page visits, and there's no number of signups. There's no number of anything that is going to tell you whether it's validated or not. And so I think this one's kind of like pretty straightforward. There's no numbers, there's no tests, there's no kind of like rule. It's all kind of like super nuanced. And so I think there's a whole class of questions like this that we get quite a lot, which is how many web page visits, how much sales, how much signups, how much whatever it is. And there's no kind of answer to it. There's no kind of like set rule. So I think I want to make that kind of clear to kind of people if they think there's just kind of like some easy kind of like number that we can have here. It would make all of our lives easier if there was, but there's not. So.
All right. Hopefully that is helpful. But if you have any follow-up questions, do let us know. All right, this next question. Will user insights be more fruitful if we
Ah.
validate ideas with the MVP as opposed to without one? Is this
Um,
definitive?
Yes, definitely. But the thing you want to kind of think about is how much more work does an MVP cost and versus kind of a landing page, right? So, is user insights more fruitful is kind of the return you get on your effort, but you also need to think about kind of like how much investment you are making to get that return. So, yeah, totally. You will get more fruitful user insights from an MVP. You'll get even more fruitful insights from building a full product and so on and so forth, right? But again, it's like how much effort do you want to kind of put in order to kind of get some of those initial kind of insights. I think the way that you want to think about validation, and we're going to go through a lot of this in the other modules in the coming weeks, is you want to do a little bit of work to get a little bit of user insights and see if that kind of like works well, that looks good. And then you want to be able to make the decision of, should I invest more time, energy, money, whatever it is, to get more user insights? And so you're progressively investing more to kind of get more as you kind of go along. Maybe a good analogy for this is, let's say that I had some newfangled investment that you should invest in, and it is like, you should invest in, I don't know, Beanie Babies or something like that. You've never invested in Beanie Babies before. I tell you should invest in Beanie Babies. Obviously, it's really bad advice to put all of your money in Beanie Babies right off the bat, right? You have no idea what they're about. You don't know how this works. You don't know anything. So the prudent thing you want to do is maybe, put a little bit of money in Beanie Babies. Maybe you put like $50 in Beanie Babies. See how that works. Get comfortable with it. Does the price go up or down? You make any money? If it goes well for you, you get some kind of like encouraging responses. Maybe you put in $250. Okay, and a little bit more encouraging, maybe $1,000, and you are stepping your way up to increasingly more investment as you get more information and kind of like results back. It's the same thing with startup ideas, and it's the same thing with validation. You increasingly kind of like step your way up. So that's how you want to think about it. Again, here, nothing is definitive. And maybe let me just kind of tackle this all, that nothing in validation is ever definitive. You will never know if your idea is like a $10 idea, $1 million idea, or $1 billion idea. And I think one of the stories that I kind of like say in kind of the modules is, I have quite a number of friends who have started $1 billion companies, which I can't believe I can say with a straight face, including Brian, by the way, my partner at Iterative. I will tell you right now, they did not think it was $1 billion company until after it was $1 billion company. And so even as you're kind of going along, you're constantly validating, like, okay, we are a $400 million company. Let's see if I can validate a new target segment that will get me to $1 billion company. And so validation is something you're kind of going in an ongoing basis. For this course, we limit validation to the early stage, like very earliest stage validation, which is, I have an idea. I haven't quit my job. I haven't invested a lot of kind of time and effort into this thing. How do I go about kind of doing that to see if I should kind of take the, like, I don't know, ultimate plunge, which is quitting your job, going full time on something. So that's kind of how you want to think about it.
Awesome. Let's switch gears a little bit to this next question. So once we have the hypothesis, do we run one experiment with one hypothesis or several experiments with that one hypothesis?
Yeah, and Melissa, I feel like we're talking about these in a lot of other modules too. So
Yeah.
I'll answer everybody's question, obviously, but you're going to get kind of more details in this too. I think what practically ends up happening is, you have a hypothesis, you design an experiment for that hypothesis. You're going to get some level of kind of information back, and that often kind of like either changes your hypothesis, or you do an iteration on the hypothesis. And then so you do another experiment to confirm the like updated hypothesis, right? So for example, one hypothesis might be, and I use this as in one of the modules, but I used to run this on-demand blue-collar staffing platform. It was basically for part-time work. And one hypothesis might be, people want to work part-time at places, and they want to do it they want a platform to do it easily. Okay, that is a hypothesis. It's a very broad hypothesis, but it's a hypothesis. So I ran an experiment. I did some ads, see if people wanted that. What I found out was younger people tend to be more interested in this. okay, I want to validate that as a thing. So I generated a new experiment to validate that more specific hypothesis. And as you kind of like do this more and more, you are kind of generating experiments to refine your hypothesis so it's more concrete and kind of like specific, and you're kind of validating it kind of like each steps of the way. That's how you're going to want to think about this. You know, if you start out with a hypothesis, you will run an experiment and you'll refine that hypothesis as you go down.
Great. This next question is more about like startup stages. So we've been operating for almost 3 years. We have paying customers. Can we say that we are past validation already?
Depends on how you define validation, right? So if you've been operating for 3 years, I assume you quit your job. Then for the purposes of this course, you are convinced enough to have quit your job because you already did. So, you know, you have validated in kind of like that sense. But again, validation is like the game that you never get rid of, and the goalpost always change. So you have paying customers. It's been 3 years. Have you validated that it's $100 million business? I don't know, right? Have you validated that it's a $10 million business? I don't know, right? It depends on kind of like how many customers and that kind of stuff. And so the main point of this, the answer to this question depends on how you define kind of like validation. And so again, we kind of like think about validation as like, how do you figure out whether you should quit your job to kind of work on this or not? So I think there's different things. Sometimes people are like, oh, I validated my idea. That means I should like, I don't know, fundraise. And like, that's a different kind of like thing too. So there are different kind of like levels. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
And by the way, this is your question. Put what you think validation is in the thing. And then I can get back to it and we can answer it.
Yeah, hopefully that helps you out. But like Sukhen said, feel free to add more. Madhu, I'll turn it over to you. So Madhu DM'd me with a question, but I'm gonna call on him to ask it out loud.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, awesome. So I'm trying to understand a little bit on how to validate a problem versus a specific, let's say, idea.
Oh,
right?
Good question.
Is the first step to validate the problem? And if so, what's the best way? Is the best way to just say, okay, I'm going to pick a specific idea and try to validate that? So let me like maybe make it a bit more concrete. Let's say the problem I'm trying to solve is SMEs have a hard time gaining access to financing from banks, and I want to solve this problem. Now, there's many different models you could use to solve that problem.
Yep.
Should I just pick one of the models and try to like solve that, or what's the best way to go about this?
Yep. This is a great question because there's a lot of kind of like nuance in it and like that kind of stuff. Okay. So, Madhu, as always, a little bit hard to hear you. It was very, very deja vu-ish, but Madhu's question is basically, I've identified a problem that I'm interested in. So I have a hypothesis about a problem. And then there's a secondary hypothesis on how to solve that problem, right? And so they're actually two separate hypotheses. And you need to kind of be able to validate both of those hypotheses to get a convincing argument that, hey, this is something you should work on. To make it concrete, Madhu was looking at, I think it was like SME, B2B financing, right? And so a lot of SMEs have a hard time getting financing to run their business, in part because banks don't know how to kind of underwrite them. And so there's lots of ways to solve that problem, but should I validate the problem first and then kind of the solutions, or kind of like, how do I kind of like tackle this, right? Okay. A couple of ways to kind of pick this out. You can work on validating the problem first, and that is a little bit trickier because that's the part where you're kind of like, okay, I'm talking to a lot of people, doing lots of surveys and all of that kind of stuff, right? Hard to run an ad that is like, do you have this problem? I guess you could and see if people like click on it and that kind of stuff, but they expect to see a solution at wherever that ad leads, right? So I think at the very earliest step, you want to probably have like qualitative information, talking to people about what their problems are and kind of seeing how many people kind of have a problem, right? So Madhu, I think you can do some early kind of validation on the problem just by talking to people. I always think about startups as is like a pair. So every startup is a pair of a problem and a solution, right? That's the pair, right? Now, for most startups, it's a problem and then they kind of like work on different solutions to kind of solve that. But at the end of the day, if a startup cannot exist if it's just identified a problem and has no solution. And it also can't exist if it's only identified a solution and has no problem, right? So you need both. What I would suggest in this case is have conversations with people about their problem, but then if you have a hypothesis for what you think the solution is, or you think there are different types of solutions, then I would do validation on those things, right? So I would maybe run an ad on a problem, drives them to different kind of like landing pages with different solutions, compare conversion rates and all of that kind of stuff. And so I think that the ultimate thing you want to validate is, do I have the right problem matched with the right solution? And is that problem kind of big enough? And does this solution kind of like solve that problem in a meaningful way? And if the answer to both of those questions is yes, you're probably in pretty good shape. If the answer to either of those questions is no, you probably got to do a little bit more, right? And so again, if you break out kind of the different options here, if you have a compelling solution to a problem that nobody really cares about, you're not getting very far. If you have, you're working on a problem that everybody cares about, but you have a non-compelling solution, you're also probably not going to get very far. And obviously, if you have both of those, you're not going to get anywhere. So really what you're looking for, really what you're validating is like, is this a problem a lot of people have? Is this a compelling solution to that problem? And you kind of like can test those in pairs. And then you can like swap out variables. You're like, okay, problem. Okay, try these different kind of solutions, see which pair kind of works the best, and kind of like move on from there. Does that make sense, Madhu?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Are you working on that idea? You should apply to Iterative.
Of course.
Okay, cool.
All right. I think you addressed this in the question or the answer that you just gave for Amadu's question, but this one, how do we distinguish insights between problem and solution validation? Is there anything else you want to add here, Sukan?
Distinguish insights. How do we distinguish insights between problem and solution validation? We could be in the correct problem space, but not. Yeah. So I think we talked about this quite a bit, but you could 100% be in the right problem space and the wrong kind of solution. And to be fair, this is what happens most of the time, I think. Actually, it turns out that this is almost always where you start. Actually, a lot of the time you probably are like not working on the right problem, if I'm kind of like being very honest. But I think for most people, when they start out, they assume they're working on the right problem, and almost all the time they don't have the right solution. You got to kind of figure this out. And in those cases, you basically test different solutions to that problem. So my general take is like, I kind of assume I kind of am working on a correct problem, and then I kind of think about some other solutions and kind of try to map them back. So yeah, like here's an example of this that I talk about in kind of like a later kind of module with the part-time thing. The problem was restaurants needed flexible staff and kind of like reliable, flexible staff. And I had kind of different value propositions for the product. So one was like earn more money, one was like flexibility, one was like work at cool places or something. And so I had 3 different versions of a landing page with all 3 value propositions, and I just like tested them against each other to see which one resonated the most. And so you can basically, like, if you are working on a problem space and you have 3 different solutions, test all 3 solutions, I guess is what I'm suggesting.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And actually it's better that way. If you only test one solution, it can be hard to compare whether it's successful or not. Like, let's take Madhu's idea. If he had only one solution, and let's say his sign-up rate was 2%, Madhu would be like, is that good or bad? I don't know, right? Mm-hmm. If he had 3 different solutions and one of them was 2% and the other 2 were 0.1%, he'd be like, well, I don't know if 2% is good, but it's a lot better than these other ones, right? And so at least it kind of gives you more directional kind of like sense.
Awesome. Let's move on to the next question. Is it popping up? No, not yet. Okay, when coming up with a hypothesis, will we need to specify a metric, or is it open-ended for interest? So for example,
good question.
X person will sign up within X weeks, months, etc.
Yeah, this is a good question. It's a good question. And like I said before, there is no kind of like specific number that means you validated it, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't have a goal. And okay, so there's no test, but why should I have a goal then? What it turns out to be is goals are useful to kind of help you set expectations yourself. So I think one thing that you are often kind of managing when working on startups is just like, should I or should I not do things? And oftentimes I find that people are very biased by the results that they get back. Like you kind of see what you want to see. And so if somebody is super excited about an idea, they get 5 signups and they're like, $1 billion idea, 5 signups, like, let's go, right? And if you're pessimistic about an idea, you get like 100 signups and you're like, well, I thought it was going to get 1,000 signups, and like whatever it is. And what you want to do is you want to set some target that you're going to try to hit at the beginning of the experiment. So again, in the modules, I basically talk about validation as just like scientific method applied to startups. In any scientific method, you write a concrete expected result and you see if the experiment gives you that or not. Now, if it doesn't give it to you, it doesn't mean you completely give up, right? Or you're like, oh, okay, cool, I didn't get that result. Maybe I change this and I'll get the result or something like that. But going in and like not having any kind of expected result, I think is problematic. And so, yeah, I would just set some target, right? So you're like, hey, I think this idea is a really good idea. I think the solution is really compelling. I'm going to try to get, I don't know, 100 signups in a month. I'm going to do everything I can to get 100 signups in a month. And if you only get 20, then you got to kind of sit back and be like, I didn't get as many signups as I wanted. Okay, what do I got to do? Like, am I still bullish on it? Maybe I'm targeting the wrong people? Am I like, I don't know, I have the wrong value proposition, whatever it is. And if you targeted 100 and you get like 1,000, you're like, maybe I'm onto something. Okay, like what's my new target? Okay, what else do I got to do? And so I think you want to be able to kind of like think about things this way. Maybe the last point, Melissa, before we kind of move here is you want to have a target and you want to have a time frame. The other mistake some people make is they say 100 signups and then they're like been working on it for 9 months trying to get 100 signups. And I'm like, it's a long time to try to get 100 signups, right? Like you should be able to do, you want to give yourself a metric and a time frame, just so you kind of like control your own kind of like sanity. And look, if you don't hit it, you may still want to work on it, but you need to have a good reason for why you think like the next outcome is going to be different from what you had before. Science.
Great. This next question is kind of a sneak peek into module 3, which folks haven't gotten yet, but it was upvoted, so I want to share it here. How do we validate? Is it popping up yet? Okay. How do we validate starting with generating traffic in a more cost-effective way? It's expensive to validate a marketplace model.
No, it's not. It's not. Let's take the idea that I was working on, part-time work, all of that kind of stuff. Two-sided marketplace. So one side is businesses. They give us kind of like information about what jobs they want to get done. One side is people who are willing to do those jobs. So marketplace, two-sided, all of that kind of stuff. You can run ads cheaply, especially in Southeast Asia. I was running ads for this place. I think for this idea, I think I was spending like $25 a week, $50, something like that. You could have done it for less, honestly. One benefit of Southeast Asia is all the ad costs are lower. The US is like orders of magnitude higher because there's more people trying to sell things to Americans because we buy too much stuff. And so there's just lower here. So with kind of $25 a week or something like that, I think I got like 1,000 signups. And so you can kind of like definitely kind of like do this. You can also just hustle. So for the businesses, for example, I was trying to get businesses who need people to work at their like restaurants and stuff. And the first thing that I did was I did try to buy ads and all that kind of stuff. Didn't work that well. But then I just started doing more hustle things where I just like went on Google Maps. And it turns out that most restaurants have phone numbers on Google Maps. So I just like copied everybody's phone number, put them in a spreadsheet, and I just started cold calling people and like cold WhatsApping them and like emailing them and like all of those kind of different things and just being like, hey, I do this thing. Absolutely zero cost. Takes a lot of hustle, takes some of your time, all that kind of stuff, but like zero cost. If that didn't work, I was prepared to just like walk around Singapore and just like go to restaurants and be like, hi, my name is Sukan. I run this thing. You should like sign up for this thing. Again, zero cost, just takes your time. The thing that actually ended up working the best though was I signed up as somebody looking for part-time jobs on job platforms. And then I looked at job postings that restaurants were posting on those platforms because obviously if they're a restaurant and they need somebody, they posted a job for it. And oftentimes on the job postings, there like a WhatsApp number or email. And so I just went to job boards as a person looking for jobs and just like copied all of their WhatsApp numbers and emails and just messaged them and was like, hey, I noticed you were looking for a dishwasher. I run this platform that's going to do all these things. Like, I can help you out. You don't have to pay me unless I get you somebody. And like, again, that was completely free. I just signed up as a job poster. So there's a lot of creative in the modules that I kind of do. I talk about a lot of creative ways that don't cost money to kind of validate. And these are kind of some of the ones that will kind of like work for people. So lots of ways to do it if you're kind of like not sure.
Great. This next one is, I have built a marketplace connecting buyers and sellers of pre-owned art. How do I validate a C2C model? Is there room for informing and cultivating users?
I mean, same kind of thing. I don't think there's anything kind of like different about C2C kind of like stuff. You, on one hand, you need to find people who are selling art. And on the other hand, you need to find people who buy art, right? And if you want to kind of validate that, you should be working on stuff that convinces people that want to sell art that they should list it on your thing. You could even go to other platforms where this kind of happens and tell them about your platform and what's different about it, that kind of stuff. You could even go to kind of like art galleries and sellers and that kind of stuff, and even private sellers, and try to reach out to them. Similarly, for people who are interested in buying art, I mean, for that one, buying art, I think is even more straightforward. You could actually run Instagram and Facebook ads for that one, right? Just be like, hey, interested in kind of buying art, you know, we can, this is a platform that does that and all of that stuff. So I think it's pretty straightforward. It's kind of like my example. I think you can hustle your way into people who sell art, and you can just do ads for people who are buying art and then just validate it that way. If you want to do, this is kind of a next step, I would do all of those things first. If you wanted to do like a very minimal, actual minimal kind of MVP, I know you built it already, but honestly, for all the people who want to sell art, I would just get them all to take a picture, send it to me, and I would just make Notion page galleries of all the art that people can like buy. And then I would just send that Notion to everybody who wants to buy art and just be like, yo, if you want anything, WhatsApp me. Like, that fundamentally is a product that does what you're talking about here, right? Is like, some group can put art up, some group can buy art. That's a product. I think sometimes people think about products, like tech products, as like, I got to build an app or I got to write all this software. And it's like, that's not true. A product is something that delivers the outcome that your customers are looking for and users are looking for. And oftentimes you can do that without building all the other stuff. Now, long-term, yes, build an app. It's nicer. You can do a bunch of stuff that you can't do with kind of like a Notion page or whatever. But in the early days, I think that tends to be kind of a thing. My part-time idea, I think I was doing 20, 30,000 GMV in wages a week. And it was basically just WhatsApp spreadsheets. Businesses will WhatsApp me with jobs. I would like WhatsApp people if they wanted the jobs. Like, that's it, right? I never even built an app. And by the way, that is, I never built an app despite being an engineer myself. And like, I can very much kind of build that app. But I was like, what's the point? It's not worth my time right now. Yeah.
Awesome. Hopefully that helps the person who submitted that. This next question, given that our customers in Singapore value personal connections in person, how can we ensure unbiased feedback during our validation?
Yeah, so I talk about this in kind of one of the upcoming modules, and basically one of the things that I talk about is not all feedback is equally valuable. And so, like, for example, if I was working on something and I asked Melissa, who technically works for me, I probably don't believe a lot of what Melissa says about my idea, because I mean, Melissa technically works for me. Like, she is super biased, right? And look, Melissa probably wouldn't kind of like do that or whatever, but you just can't believe it. So the thing that I think a lot about is, rather than, I don't rely on people telling me whether they would do something, I try to set up a situation to see if they would do it. And so the best example of this, or the easiest one to understand, is rather than asking Melissa, would you pay for X? I try to set up a situation that makes it look like Melissa can do X and see if Melissa does X. Okay, maybe a really fun example of this, that one of the first companies we invested in at Iterative did, was they were, this was like 5 years ago now, they were a buy now, pay later company, and for the Philippines. before there was a bunch of buy now, pay later companies, but they were buy now, pay later for the Philippines. And they didn't know if people in the Philippines would want to take loans, and they didn't know what types of people would do it. So what the founder did, and I basically invested in them like immediately after I heard the story. I was like, oh, this is great. Like whatever you guys are going to be doing is going to be successful because you're doing weird stuff like this. Okay, so here's what he did. He realized that sneakers were really popular at the time. And he made a Shopify website in a night that basically was like, had all of the hottest sneakers on his Shopify site. Now, he didn't own any of those sneakers. He didn't have any of those things. He just took the like hottest sneakers, which Madhu can probably tell you about, but it's some of that Travis Scott stuff and, all of that kind of stuff. So he had this website with all these sneakers, and he bought ads saying that he had all of these sneakers, and he drove it to the Shopify site. As part of the Shopify checkout process, he added a link that was basically like, do you want to get a loan to kind of like buy these shoes? And if you click on the link, it goes to an Airtable form and asks them for a bunch of information, which was basically KYC. And then after it kind of goes through the whole thing, he went and he checked how many people filled out that entire form. Now, to be clear, he didn't charge anybody. So he basically had Stripe reject all payments because he doesn't actually care. He's like, it's not validating whether people actually want to buy sneakers or not. He's validating whether people are willing to fill out this form to get loans, how many of them will do it. And out of like 100 people that go through this checkout process, how many people of them clicked on this? And then how many people filled out the form? And for all the people who filled out the form, he asked for like income level and all that kind of stuff so you could get a sense of who these people are. And again, he could have sent out a survey to everybody and was like, hey, would you take a loan and all this kind of stuff. But instead, he decided to see if people would actually take a loan and they would put the effort in behind it, and like created this entire kind of like false sneaker website to kind of test it out. And that is totally I don't know who Rainier is, but it's TendoPay. It is 100% TendoPay. This is what they did to get started. So yes, it is that. But that's how I would kind of ensure unbiased kind of feedback is the best way to get unbiased feedback is for people to not to think it's real, basically, and see what they do.
Yeah, that's great. This next one is more about budget. So how to define the ads budget for B2C startup idea? Yes. I have $500 in total. Should I test 2 ideas for $250 each, or 5 ideas for $100 each, or something else?
I would do something else. So what I would do is, again, think about it as like progressively investing more and more resources. So in the beginning, I mean, I don't know how many ideas you have, but in the beginning, I would test like 5 ideas for like $20 first, right? Just to try to get a feel for it. So maybe each idea only gets $5. I don't know, or $10 or some small amount, right? Just to kind of test this out. You're going to actually get some reasonable information on that level of ideas. And you probably can weed out a few ideas just at that level. Then for the ideas that are left that seem a little bit more promising, I would maybe spend a little bit more money to get more information on that. So I think the way to think about it is like, if you have 10 ideas, you want to whittle it down to 5. And then if you have 5 ideas, whittle it down to 3, and then kind of 3 to 1. And then if you have $500, you kind of like want to be like at the 1 by the $500. And so I would kind of like spend less money per idea in the beginning, and then kind of more money per idea as you kind of like move forward. So that's kind of how I would think about it. But 500 is like plenty fine. I think you can test quite a few number of ideas by that. Depending on this type of product you're also kind of like trying to test, it could be cheaper, and like it could be cheaper or more expensive. And so you also get if you start these campaigns at a low amount of money, you can get a feel for it. So I don't know, it could be like $10 got you 10,000 impressions, or like $10 got you 100 impressions, right? So you want to kind of get a feel for that before you kind of put a lot more money in. So yeah, think about it that way.
Awesome. This next one, during validation, should I compare my landing page metrics to the closest competitors? So if they have 4% conversion, I have 60%. Does that mean I'm doing good?
Yeah, except for I don't know how you can get your competitor's conversion rate. I mean, I would love to get that, but like I just don't know how you would kind of like get that. So I would be very skeptical of whatever number you're kind of getting from it. If you are just reading that from some online like I don't know, article that somebody said about their conversion rate or whatever, I would take that with a lot of grains of salt. Nobody is that honest about their performance kind of like in public forums that way. So yeah, I mean, if you knew for 100% certainty, that means I think you're kind of like doing well, but like I have a hard time believing that you're going to be able to get metrics on the kind of a close competitor. Adjacent question that I think is kind of interesting is that's why you want to run multiple versions of your own kind of like idea with kind of variations on value propositions or ideas, because you can compare them against each other. One of the base case one of the things that I do to get a base case on my competitor, though, is let's say that I have I basically copy the language that a competitor uses on their website, and I make that one of my tests as a base case. So again, maybe Melissa has a competing startup and it's all about make more money, right? And my startup is like, I think people really care about flexibility more, right? And so one thing I'll do is I'll run two tests. One that is word for word a copy of what Melissa's website says, that is like make more money, however she says it. And then I run one with what I think. And that will basically give me kind of like a head-to-head test of like whether my value proposition kind of like resonates more with consumers than a competitor or not. So that is one way you can get the conversion rate of your competitors, is just like copy them and run it as a test and then compare what you're doing kind of like against it. And so, yeah, maybe that's how I would do it. If you're trying to kind of compete against competitors, I would just like copy their text. If you are doing something that is similar to a large company, like when I was working on this on-demand blue-collar staffing platform, which is similar to a lot of other kind of like marketplaces, including kind of like Uber and Grab. I went to Google and I Google image searched Uber Facebook ads. And somebody had captured a bunch of Uber Facebook ads, and I just used their language, but inserted my thing. So they were all about kind of like make more money, kind of like driving around. And mine was like, make more money working at restaurants. And the reason why I wanted to do that was because larger companies spend a lot of money optimizing these. And so you can kind of like piggyback their learnings by just like copying whatever their kind of ads are and then running that against what you currently have. So I don't know if people are kind of like, I don't know, Harry Potter fans or whatever, but there are some like, I won't say dark arts, but there are some like gray arts to kind of like, get some leg up, take advantage of kind of like what you have. Oh, yeah. Facebook ad library. Great. Yeah.
Yeah. Madhu is sharing some of the dark arts in the chat too.
Message Madhu for all the dark arts. He is a king of dark arts.
All right. This next question. What if you actually have domain experience and know exactly the pain points and are 100% sure people need it? Do you just move to execution?
100% not. 100% not. And look, there's going to be some cases where it's like, okay, maybe you are right or whatever, but like those cases are so rare. And if you think you're that, you are like, and look, it's possible. You are way smarter than me, and you're way smarter than all of my friends who like do startups, because we always get this wrong. And so I think the world is very complicated, and people are really complicated. Just because you have domain expertise in something and you think something is a problem doesn't mean everybody else thinks about that problem. And the way that you communicate that problem also doesn't mean that's how other people communicate it. And so I think the interesting thing is the friends that I have, the startup founder friends that I have who are second and third time founders, spend more time validating despite knowing way more now. It's like, the better people get at startups, the more validation they do. And the reason why that ends up being the case is because the better you get at startups, the more opportunity cost you have, right? Like, okay, I've started a couple companies, we sold some or whatever. 5 to 7 years of my career, a lot of stuff I could be doing there. I do not want to get stuck working on some problem that is like not a real problem and sucks. So I'm spending the upfront time to make sure I spend the next 5 to 7 years of my life working on a problem that is like real and I'm going to work on. And look, I think validation is just like not, it honestly is like not that hard. It doesn't take that much time, right? So I don't know, spend a month, spend 3 months kind of validating an idea, so you don't spend the next 5 or 7 years kind of working on like a crappy idea. That seems like really, really good ROI for me. The second thing I would also say is validation also teaches you a lot about that. So if you think you understand a problem, doing validation will refine how you frame that problem. Okay, I studied math in school, and I think an interesting thing about high-level math is you spend the majority of the time trying to define the problem in a way that allows you to kind of like work it out. And so a lot of it is just like, okay, well, how do we kind of define this problem? And I think this happens a lot in kind of like startups too. If the problem you're solving is SMEs have a hard time growing, it's not actually yes, that's a problem, but you actually, as part of that statement, there is no hypothesis on what keeps them from growing. Like that's like saying my problem is I need $1 billion. It's not actually a problem. It's just like a thing I want to have, right? Like you need to do the work to kind of dig into. It's like, well, why don't you have $1 billion? Right? It's like, well, I haven't done anything that and like you kind of need to dig in and that kind of stuff. So even if you end up being right about what that problem is, I think the validation process will teach you a lot about that problem and how to frame it, and you'll learn quite a lot. Maybe the other thing I'll say too is validation also makes fundraising is a means to an end. So I don't want to overstate how important it is. But validation will also teach you things that will be helpful in kind of communicating your idea to others, because you'll have kind of more tangible learnings and stuff. So yes, 100%. Always validate every time, no exceptions.
All right, the next two are more about specific ideas, but they've been upvoted a few times. So this first one, how to validate B2B that sold to businesses on annual contracts.
I paused for a moment because I was going to say something really snarky, and then I was like, okay, I got to try to be like, more helpful here. The snarky thing I wanted to say was sell annual contracts. Like you can sell contracts before you actually build anything. It is possible, right? And I know in like Southeast Asia, oftentimes this is kind of like, oh my gosh, how can I do this? I don't have the products, or like all of that kind of stuff. But like, it's funny because in San Francisco, it's like people are selling all kinds of stuff they don't have yet. So look, you can kind of try to sell this. So you can start talking to customers. You can at least validate through kind of like, okay, there's a couple of ways to do this. Let me give an actual answer. Validation comes in increasing degrees, and this is the module that I just recorded. So think about it as like a funnel. So if you are selling to kind of B2B businesses, one measure is like, will anybody reply to your emails or LinkedIn messages? Right? If nobody replies, that's not a good sign. If some people reply, that's like a good sign. Doesn't mean you're onto anything, but that's a sign. So if they reply to your LinkedIn messages and you ask them to get on a phone call, and they actually get on phone calls, okay, that's even better than them replying. So replying, yes, that's nice. Getting on a phone call with you, even better. If they are willing to buy your product that doesn't exist yet, and maybe you just tell them you're like, I'll build it in kind of like a month. I'll give you kind of a sweetheart deal that's like 50% off, whatever it is. If they're willing to kind of make some level of commitment, whether it's LOI or actually transfer money, that's an even stronger indicator of interest. So you have this multiple levels indicators of interest where it's like they replied to your message, weak indicator of interest. They got on a phone call with you, okay, medium indicator of interest. They signed an LOI, or they're willing to kind of like pay you some amount of money, very strong indicator of interest. So you can kind of work down these ways. I'm going to tell actually it's fun. Like we have iterative companies. So I hear a lot of these stories now. So we had an iterative company, and they don't do this anymore. So I can talk about this. They were working on a payroll software solution for Web3 companies. And basically the trick was that Web3 companies, oftentimes the employees want to get paid in crypto, but not all of them. And there's all these things, but they hadn't built the product. And so they joined the batch, and they're like, okay, well, what are we going to do during the batch? Because we have to build the product, and it'll probably take 3 months. And I said, oh, it's very simple. Don't build the product. You are not going to build the product at all during the batch. And they were like, what are you talking about? Like, what are we going to do then? I was like, you're going to sell the product. And well, basically what we made them do, I didn't make them. I strongly suggested this is what they should do. And they did it, which was they basically just started doing an entire sales process. They just started reaching out to people on LinkedIn, emailing people, getting on sales calls, and they acted like they had a product that did payroll. Then one day in office hours, they come to office hours and they're like, oh shit, a customer wants to pay us. Like, and they want to start using it like 2 weeks from now. And again, remember, they don't have a product. They're like, what do we do? And I was like, first of all, congratulations. Let's have a party. You have an actual customer. So that's a good sign. 2, you don't actually have to build the product. You just have to be able to do what you said that they were going to do, which is they want to be able to send you crypto and you need to disperse it out to people. So have a wallet address, get an upload of a spreadsheet of kind of like where these addresses should go, have them kind of transfer money to the wallet, and then do the transfers yourself. And if you want to be really Wizard of Oz, basically make a web app that is not really that dynamic and basically upload all of the like transaction information to it. So it's all there. So they have a dashboard to look at, but like the back is just you transferring money and updating a database, like editing database fields. And that's what they did. And then they kept selling. And they just kept doing that. And I think they got to like 10 customers before they actually had to like build anything, right? And all the customers were perfectly happy. Like it did what they said it was going to do. Here's a list of people with their addresses. Here's crypto. You make sure it gets distributed out and you record all of the transactions and you give me kind of like a pay slip. It did all those things. It was all manual, but they did all those things. And so again, you can validate this by doing all the selling first. And then if anybody actually buys, you can often kind of do some very hacky kind of MVP to kind of actually deliver on those things without building the software. So.
All right, great. I'm looking at time. We do have a few more questions left. So let's see how many we can get through. So this next question kind of represents a few other questions in the queue. And it's really about like, how do you even come up with an idea? So how to come up with an idea to test or validate in the user categories? Like what's the step number 0, not even 1, 0.
Lots to unpack here. And we could probably do an entire course on how to come up with startup ideas.
Yeah.
I actually think Brian and I made a video on this, Melissa. If you can find it, I think it was like one of the first videos we make, but it's like how to come up with startup ideas. There's lots of ways to come up with startup ideas. I recommend kind of watching the video. We kind of enumerate like most of them, and you'll get a better answer than I'm about to give you. But off the top of my head, there's a couple of things that I like to do in these cases. One is you can obviously look for problems that exist in your life, and you can kind of like try to solve some of those problems. So that's the kind of tried and true method. Now, oftentimes though, like if you're kind of like an average person, and especially if you kind of like work in tech and stuff, a lot of those ideas have been kind of mined out. So it's almost kind of like the people who make all the hammers kind of like hammered all the nails. And it's like, yeah, well, tech people build stuff. And so they looked at all the problems around them and they like solved all the problems around them, right? The interesting thing, and this is what I would do if I was starting a company now, is I would embed myself with people who don't use technology at all and industries that typically don't have anything to do with them. And so like one of the things that I was thinking about doing was my father works in manufacturing, and I wanted to embed myself in their shipping department to just like spend a week with the shipping department and just ask lots of questions about like what happens. Because people who work in shipping do not typically build products and are not tech people. And there's not a lot of people with access to the shipping department. And so most people who want to start companies probably just don't know much about the shipping department because none of them ever worked in the shipping department before, right? And so I'm just like hunting in places that other people have not like looked, and looking for ideas in those places. And so I think that's like where I would kind of like often start the most. Southeast Asia is even more rich in this, because I just think technology hasn't kind of like, so much of Southeast Asia hasn't been digitized yet. And there's like tons of places you can kind of like dig around in places. So I think that's kind of like a good place. Oh, somebody watched our video with the 2x2. That 2x2 is definitely kind of like how I kind of like think about this too. But yeah, lots of different places that you can kind of like look up kind of ideas and stuff. But I like looking at places other people kind of haven't looked at before. The other thing that you can think about is, and a lot of people are doing this now, is as new technologies come out, you can think about new technologies as like new tools that allow you to potentially solve problems that couldn't be solved before, or can be solved in a new way that might be better. So like AI is obviously kind of like a really good example of this. There's like a new set of problems. There's probably a set of problems that have always been there, but couldn't be solved because there wasn't a tool like AI. To use an analogy again, it's kind of like maybe before we all had screwdrivers and there was these problems that looked like nails. And then all of a sudden somebody came up with a hammer and we're like, oh my God, we can solve all of the problems that needed a hammer before because now we have a hammer, right? AI is kind of this way. Crypto was kind of a lot of this way. So another way you can look at this too is just like, you get new tools every once in a while. What problems can you use that new tool to kind of like build? And so everybody kind of like works on these. So I've seen this with AI. I've seen this with crypto. I've seen this with mobile phones. I mean, the internet, when it first came out, was kind of this way. And so you kind of see this quite a lot. So lots of different ways to look at it. Melissa can send out kind of the video. But yeah, lots of kind of different ways to look at it.
I'll send out resources.
Yeah.
This next question, the short answer is watch one of our next videos, but it's been uploaded a few times. So anything you want to address right here with the audience, can you elaborate on how to set up the right ad strategy with such small budgets?
How to set up the right ad strategy. I think the way that I would, I just found the video because it randomly showed up right when I logged in. Okay, that's the video. Brian and I talk about how to find ideas. Set up the right ad strategy. The way that I would answer this first is, and I'm super annoying, especially to my girlfriend. It depends on what you mean by right ad strategy, and you got to kind of define this. For a validation purpose, I think the right ad strategy is not to be as cost effective as possible. So if you work at Grab and you are picking the right ad strategy, it's basically like, what is the lowest amount of money I can spend to acquire a new rider or a new driver? Like, that's the goal. Just make that happen. When you're validating a startup, the thing that you want to think about is, how do I spend the least amount of money to generate the most amount of learnings about your customers? And like imagine that you were doing a validation and I don't know, I was talking to somebody doing validation. They're like, oh my gosh, we acquire customers at 20 cents per customer. And I'm like, okay, well, who are the customers and why are they using it? And they're like, I don't know. I'd be like, wow, what are we talking about? Right? Like you maybe are acquiring them cheap, but you like don't actually understand any of your customers. And so I think in our case, I would frame this as kind of like, okay, well, how do I set up ads so that I can learn from customers on a small budget? Okay, so how do you do that? When I first start working on a new idea and I'm running ads, I purposely don't do a bunch of demographic targeting. So if I'm working on a new idea and I had a hypothesis that it's like young people, Singapore, male who live in Orchard or something like that, I could make it super specific and make an ad that way. That's typically a bad idea though, because you want to like be able to learn. And so what I typically do is I actually just make an ad campaign for like all of Singapore. I know it's going to cost more per sign up, but I want to be able to canvas all of the different demographics in Singapore to see if there's a specific demographic that performs significantly better than others. And look, maybe I was right. Maybe it was like young people who live in Orchard and are like female or something like that. But I want the information on all the other demographics to do that. So you can almost think about it as like you're paying Facebook to like canvas for you, and I want to canvas everybody, and then in their tools you can like filter by specific demographics to kind of find out where you get better results than others. And then I kind of like start building more refined hypotheses there, right? So let's say I find out that it turns out like older people are really interested in that. I would never have figured that out before because that wasn't part of my hypothesis set. But now that I see that pop, I can kind of do an ad set that is specifically targeted at older people, so I can find out like, okay, why do older people interested in this? Maybe they care about something that the younger people didn't. And so actually this happened in SingleShift is like, I had two demographics. There was young people that cared about A, and I had a different demographic B, which was older people who cared about some other thing. The younger people basically cared about flexibility, and the older people kind of just wanted something to do on their kind of like free time. Otherwise they're kind of stuck at home. And so I wouldn't have learned that without kind of starting out wide and then kind of being narrowed in. So and again, I would take this. So I would start wide, then narrow in, and I would take the same approach, which is spend less money kind of like early on, get a feel for kind of like what the results are like. And then you can kind of increase the budget as you kind of like learn more and kind of like go in.
Thanks, Ken. It's at the hour.
I'm good. We got a couple more.
Yeah. Okay. If people have to drop off, thanks for joining. We'll share the recording of the session in a couple of days. I'll also transfer all the questions that have been answered and any questions that have not been answered to a doc, and we'll distribute that as well. So if you're okay, I'll have you spend some time answering any of the outstanding questions so that
Yep, let's do it.
Questions, get answered. All right. Let's do a few more questions. So this next one, we also answer it in one of our videos, but if you want to share a little bit right now, what marketing channels or approaches should founders pursue if they're new to marketing in general? Like, what are some go-tos for solo early founders?
Honestly, I think ads are the most versatile because you can do them for all types of businesses. And so whether Facebook ads or kind of Google ads, and again, you can do it cheaply, you can do it for very little. It's just like instant kind of like distribution. And so ads are just really versatile. That's the one I kind of go to the most. So that's where I would probably start. The other one too, which is depending on kind of the type of business you're kind of like trying to do, but B2B businesses, if you're targeting those kinds of things, I would get good at like trying to figure out how to do basically cold outreach and sales. I think that's the other one that you can kind of like hustle your way into a lot of stuff. So if there was only kind of 2 channels that I would work on, it would probably be ads and then kind of like figure out how to do kind of like sales. Those are probably the 2. The third one, which I cover in module 3, which is like a catch-all list, I'll kind of talk about a little bit, is the hustle bucket. And the hustle bucket is basically like, can you figure out clever ways to reach people? And by clever ways, I mean, they're often like they're not against the law. Like I'm not going to tell anybody to break the law, but they are kind of like breaking social norms. And oftentimes in those places, you can kind of get some gains. Here's an example. When I remember there was a company that went through YC, and this is the most San Francisco idea ever. They help you fight parking tickets. So it was an app. If you get a parking ticket in San Francisco, you take a picture, you upload it into this app, they help you fight it. And it's like $35 and they help you fight it or whatever. And I had heard that the founders, in order to validate the idea, I mean, Singapore is the same way, everywhere is the same way. There are people who drive around the city writing tickets, right? So they drive around the city, they write a ticket or whatever. So every day they would drive into the city, they would drive around until they found one of these people who went around and wrote tickets. And then every time they wrote a ticket, they would go up and staple a flyer to the ticket. And that's basically like, I'm really sorry you got this ticket. I can help you fight it though. You should go to this website and take a picture of your ticket, and we'll help you fight it. And that kind of stuff is always, people would like look at them weird, and the meter person would be like, why are you following me? And they would explain what they're doing and all that kind of stuff. And some people wouldn't be that happy, but like not against the law, right? Just kind of a bit of clever and kind of a bit of hustle. And so I think if you can kind of find those types of things, they tend to be the best, and they're often free and that kind of stuff. So there are those things. I know a lot of people have also like talked their way into conferences and events because they said they were like, I don't know, part of the press or like, I don't know, something like that. And so, there's lots of things you can kind of do here. Yeah.
All right, maybe a couple more questions. So this next one, I have 200 users on my iPhone app, but I have no idea why they downloaded it and used it. What do I do? It's a good problem to have.
Start talking to them. Look, I would honestly, like, hopefully you have their emails and stuff. I would, maybe you don't if they just downloaded the app, but actually they probably had to register, right? So I would start emailing them. I would start emailing them and be like, hey, like, I would love to talk. I'm the one that created this app. I would love to talk to you about kind of like what you're using it for. And I would start having conversations with them about what they are. So that's the immediate first place to talk, is just start talking to your users. Why do you use it? Ask them a set of questions, that kind of stuff. The other thing that you can probably glean from this is they're probably downloading it for the reasons that you have on your like Apple iStore page, iPhone page, right? Like they're looking at your like page and they're like, there's something about what you're saying or the screenshots or something that makes them want to download it. People just don't download apps for like no reason. And so there's something on your page that is getting at least some 200 people to kind of like download it. And so that's like a reasonable place to start. Is just look at what you've written down. That's driving some amount of people. But the best way to kind of answer this question is like email people, start talking to them, get on calls with them. I don't know, offer them Lazada gift cards or Amazon gift cards of like $10 if they'll get on a call with you, whatever it is. But talk to them.
All right. This next one. What if I have sales from posting on relevant subreddits, but spent $200 on Google Ads and got no sales at all?
I love that this is actually one of the things I put in one of the modules is subreddits. Subreddits are like one of my favorite places to kind of like dig because subreddits are by definition a community of people around a certain thing. And so if you are building something for that community of people, it's awesome. So I'm glad that you did this. All this tells me is two things. One, your Google ads could be really bad. Like they just don't resonate with people, they suck, whatever, all that kind of stuff. I have no idea. Like I don't know what your ad said, but like that's possible. Or it could be that you targeted the wrong words in Google Ads. So that could be another reason. The third reason is it could just be that people don't use Google to search for whatever it is you're like looking for. Right. And so then, yeah, it wouldn't kind of like work that way. And so this is super not common. This is not surprising to me. Like this kind of thing happens all the time. That's all it could kind of mean. So, you know, it just tells me that the subreddit is a better place for you than kind of the Google ads. If you haven't iterated on the Google ads though, I wouldn't kind of just give up on them right away. I would try to come up with some hypothesis for like, maybe my ads sucked. Let's try some new ads and then kind of like see if you get any sales that way, try some new keywords. And if you really can't get anything to work, then you might just conclude, hey, maybe people don't search with us through Google or whatever. Quick side note on when to use Google ads versus Facebook ads. Facebook and Instagram ads are for when you are targeting specific demographics, because that's what Facebook is. Facebook has all your demographic information. Google is for when you are targeting people searching for a specific thing. So for example, if I'm starting a business that helps connect you with a lawyer, I'm not using Facebook and Google ads because everybody needs lawyers. I don't know what demographic I would target. But I would use Google because people use Google to like search for lawyers. Like people are probably like, I need a lawyer, and you can like show up there, right? So as people say, Facebook knows who you are and Google knows what you want. So act accordingly.
Great. This next question, do you think founders should study more books and courses or try more with micro startups or more ideas in practice?
Everybody has different ways of learning. And so I just want to kind of caveat that right off the bat. My general recommendation to people, though, is I feel like you learn more when you are trying to achieve something. And so my advice to people is try to start a startup. And look, you don't have to quit your job right away or anything like that. But like if somebody came up to me and they're like, hey, what would you do to kind of start a startup now? I would basically be like, and they've never started anything before, I would just be like, pick any idea. Don't worry about if it's a good idea. Don't worry if it's a bad idea. Like, don't worry about whether it's $1 billion. Don't worry about any of those things. Any idea that you have that you think people might use, I would pick that as like as an idea. And then I would start trying to like work on it, right? I would try to start validating. I was trying to start doing all of that kind of stuff. And that will force you to run into the problems and questions that you have. And then I would use books, courses, videos, all that kind of stuff to help answer those questions. And then you kind of like keep it moving. That's actually what I did when I first got started. It was like, I just wanted to kind of start stuff. And so I just started working on whatever ideas I had. I had like no measure for how good they are or anything like that. But I just wanted to run into the problems as quickly as possible and build the skills for how to kind of like start a startup, so that when I eventually kind of had a good idea, I kind of like had all the skills kind of like ready to go. So that's what I would do.
All right. Maybe we have one last question, then we wrap it up. So let me see. How would we approach B2B company to get them to sign up, as they usually get so many ads that they're reluctant to sign up for anything at all?
How would we approach to get them? How would we approach to get them? It's not true. It's actually just not true. B2B companies, look, you got to do sales. You're basically reaching out to people, right? I think one of the things that our companies kind of have the best success with is actually LinkedIn cold outreach. You'd be surprised at how well that does. I saw Andreas kind of like message here about kind of just like mass emailing people. Look, when you're an early stage startup, there's no reason that you need to be mass emailing people. Like, you should just be doing really personalized hustle stuff, right? So let's say you're a B2B company and you're trying to sell to, I don't know, startups or something like that. You could go on LinkedIn in an afternoon and just find 100 startups on LinkedIn and send them each personalized messages with how you think you can help their startup. Like, you can be able to do that. You don't need to kind of like worry about kind of automation or kind of mass or reach out to 1,000 people. Just like, can you reach out with a high quality message to like 100 startups, right? And look, maybe 50 of them respond, maybe 10 of them get back to you, and maybe you kind of close 5 of them or something like that. But that's pretty good already, right? So I think that's the benefit when you're first starting out, is you don't have to worry about scale. So don't do it yet. Optimize for kind of like hit rate, right? So look, do everything you can to kind of like stack the deck in your favor when you're early on. One of the things that I like to kind of think about is in the early days, you could basically give people the like best possible experience because you can do it all manually, right? Like I'll literally do everything. I'll personalize everything for you. And if nobody wants the best possible experience that you can give them, they're definitely not going to want the one that you're going to do once it's not personalized, right? So I think that's how I kind of tend to kind of like think about it, is like, hey, do people want the best version of this? I'll give them the best version. And if people don't want that, then, you know, there's no hope for it kind of like later on anyway. So that's kind of how I would do it. B2B sales are more people, 100%. I apologize. I don't know how to kind of say your name, Lezik, but it's totally B2B. All sales is sales between people every single time, always, right? You're always selling to people. Those people might work at a company, but you are always selling to people. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks to Ken for spending time. Thank you everybody for joining us. Appreciate all the questions. We have like 20 more questions in queue. So
Oh, really?
yeah, a lot of questions. But we will send out the recording of the session. We'll put all these questions in a document. So Ken will spend some time with them and then we'll share it out with everybody. Look out on Monday for an email from me for the next set of videos for modules 3 and 4. You'll hopefully, some of the things that we shared today will sound familiar to you, and we'll dive a little bit deeper in the videos, but appreciate you all spending this last hour with us. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Good questions.